The transport ship's alarm shrieked through the cargo bay like a dying creature, and Cadet Shigera felt her secondary heart skip in rhythm. Around her, 200 cadets from across the Galactic Coalition scrambled to secure their survival packs, mandibles clicking, tentacles flailing, scales rippling with barely contained panic. "Atmospheric breach in 30 seconds," Commander Rex's voice crackled through the intercom. His usual stoic Krillian composure fractured by urgency. "Emergency deployment protocol engaged. All cadets to drop pods immediately." This wasn't supposed to happen. The routine transport to the Coalition Academy's orbital station had transformed into a nightmare at 40,000 feet above disaggregation Carnivac 7, a planet so hostile it carried a Class 4 Deathworld rating. Only 3 planets in the known galaxy wore that particular badge of lethality. Zakara's chitinous legs carried her toward Pod 24-7, her training kicking in despite the terror flooding her nervous system. The Vrillic species prided themselves on composure under pressure, but composure meant little when facing a world where the atmosphere itself could dissolve unprotected flesh in minutes. "Move, move, move," Cadet Tormund bellowed, his granite-like Kruvanite physiology making him uniquely suited to survival situations. He physically shoved smaller cadets toward their designated pods, his booming voice cutting through the chaos. "Secure your emergency beacons. Check your atmospheric filters." Shakara squeezed into her pod next to 3 others. Lissa, a crystalline Shularan whose facets were currently flashing distress patterns. Kix, a serpentine Narath whose scales had turned a sickly gray. "Hey, room for one more?" The human, of course it was the human. Cadet Reese Dalton wedged himself into the remaining space with the casual ease of someone boarding a leisure shuttle rather than plummeting toward certain doom. His pale face carried that peculiar expression humans often wore, what they called a grin, showing far too many teeth for any rational being's comfort. "Perfect," Reese said, slapping the pod's interior wall. "Cozy, we're dropping onto Carnivac 7, Kix hissed, his translator rendering his panic into common. "Carnivac 7. Do you understand what that means?" "Sure," Reese said, checking his harness with infuriating nonchalance. "Class 4 Deathworld. Aggressive megafauna, toxic flora, atmospheric instability, extreme weather patterns, geological volatility. Basically the planet's trying to kill everything on it at all times." "Then why?" Zakara demanded. "Are you smiling? Because freaking out won't change anything?" Reese shrugged, that baffling human gesture that conveyed everything and nothing simultaneously. "Besides, how bad can it be?" The pod bay door's explosive decompression answered his question with the roar of escaping atmosphere. "Wrap sequence initiated," the automated system announced with mechanical indifference. "Survival probability calculated at 17%. Coalition rescue operations will commence upon planetary survey completion. Estimated time to rescue 72 hours. 17%, Lissa's crystalline voice rang with despair. 17%, better than 0, Reese offered cheerfully as their pod's magnetic locks disengaged. The fall felt eternal and instantaneous. Jakara's stomach lurched into her thorax as the pod tumbled through Carnivac 7's atmosphere heat shield screaming against the friction. Through the small viewport she glimpsed other pods streaking downward like meteorites, trailing fire and hope in equal measure. The planet below revealed itself in terrifying detail. Emerald jungles that writhed with movement, mountain ranges that pierced the cloud layer like jagged teeth, rivers of something that definitely wasn't water cutting through landscapes that seemed to shift even from this altitude. Their pod's stabilizers engaged, slowing their descent from terminal velocity to merely bone rattling. The impact came hard enough to knock Skara's vision sideways, her restraints cutting into her carapace as the pod buried itself into soft earth. For a moment, silence. Then the external sensors began reporting environmental data, and Jakara felt her primary heart clench. Temperature 42 degrees Celsius. She read from the display, her voice hollow. Humidity 94%. Atmospheric composition breathable but with trace toxins requiring filtration. Ambient radiation elevated but within survival parameters. Local fauna signatures 372 distinct biological masses within scanning range. 372. Corx's scales had gone completely white. That's That's more than the entire population of my home colony. Oxygen's at 26%, Reese noted, checking his wrist display. Nice. That'll make everything grow bigger and more aggressive. Fun. Fun? Jakara rounded on him. You consider this fun? I mean, objectively, it's terrible, Reese admitted, unstrapping from his harness. But panicking about it won't help, so we might as well make the best of it. Now let's see what we've got for supplies. The pod's emergency locker contained exactly what Coalition regulations promised. Water purification tablets, high-calorie nutrient bars, basic medical supplies, a plasma cutter, 2 signal flares, emergency shelter material, and 4 atmospheric filter masks rated for 72 hours of continuous use. So we've got 3 days to not die, Reese summarized, distributing the masks. Could be worse. How? Lissa demanded, her crystalline structure vibrating with stress. How could this possibly be worse? As if in answer, something massive roared in the distance, a sound that started below audible range and climbed into frequencies that made Jakara's antennae vibrate painfully. The jungle around their pod fell silent in response, even the constant insect drone cutting off like a severed wire. That, Sakara said quietly. That could make it worse. Reese's expression shifted slightly. Not quite worried, but attentive in a way that suggested he was actually taking the situation seriously. Okay, that's a big one. Probably territorial. We should move away from the pod. Noise of our landing might have attracted attention. Might have, Kix repeated incredulously. Definitely has, Reese corrected. But hey, silver lining, we know roughly where some other pods landed based on the trajectories we saw. We're not alone out here. There were 200 cadets on that transport, Zakara said, shouldering her pack. If the survival probability is 17%, that means statistically only 34 of us will live to see rescue. Then let's be part of the 34, Reese said simply, popping the pod's external hatch. The smell hit first. Jakara's olfactory receptors nearly shut down from the overwhelming assault of organic decay, pollen-thick humidity, and something else. Something that her Relics instincts identified immediately as predator musk. The air tasted green and alive and hungry. The jungle pressed in from all sides, trees with trunks wider than their pod rising into a canopy so dense it created a twilight world beneath. A bioluminescent fungi painted everything in shades of toxic purple and sickly blue. Something dripped constantly, water, sap, or substances, whose Kara didn't want to identify. Every surface writhed with life. Insects the size of her claw, parasitic vines that twitched toward warmth, flowers that smelled like rotting meat. Beautiful, Reese breathed. And Zakara genuinely couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic. A crash in the undergrowth made them all freeze. Something was approaching, something large enough to shake the ground with each footfall. Weapons, Tormund's voice came from behind them, and Zakara spun to find the massive Kruvanite emerging from the tray line with 5 other cadets in tow. His face bore a fresh wound, dark blood seeping through his stone-like skin. Grab anything that can be used as weapons. That sound means predator, and predators here don't know to be afraid of things they haven't eaten yet. You survived the drop, Zakara said, relief flooding through her. Pod 244 landed 300 meters that direction. Corvan gestured with one boulder-sized fist. Lost Cadet Vixel to an impalement. The trees here have thorns that secrete paralytic toxin. Didn't know until he stopped breathing. 17%. Zakara thought numbly. 1 down, 199 to go. The crashing grew closer, accompanied now by a wet snuffling sound that suggested something tracking by scent. Through gaps in the undergrowth, Zakara caught glimpses of hide thick plated modeled in patterns that suggested active camouflage capability. Up, Reese hissed suddenly. Everyone up now. What? Kix started to argue, but Reese was already moving, grabbing the serpentine cadet and physically throwing him toward a low-hanging branch. Ambush predator, Reese shouted. Ground-level attack. Moo! The jungle floor exploded. What emerged shouldn't have been possible. Biology didn't work this way. The creature was all teeth and muscle, 8 legs ending in seething claws, mandibles that could easily bisect a Krovanite, and eyes, so many eyes that tracked every movement with predatory intelligence. It stood 3 meters tall at the shoulder, and when it opened its mouth, Jara saw rows of teeth that spiraled back into its throat like a biological torture device. Coalition xenobiology had no classification for this thing. It was too many species merged into one nightmare. Torvald roared a challenge, his Kruvanite battle cry shaking loose leaves from nearby trees. He charged the creature with the fearlessness of a species that had evolved on a high-gravity world where everything was either predator or prey, and only the strong survived either category. The creature's speed defied its size. It sidestepped Tormund's charge with fluid grace, one claw casually opening a wound across his torso that would have disemboweled a lesser being. Tormund crashed into a tree hard enough to crack the trunk, but he was already rolling, already moving, because stopping meant death. Its underside. Rhys called from his perch. The plates don't extend underneath. Tormund, roll under it. How could he possibly know that? Chakra thought. But Tormund was already following the instruction, his combat training overriding any questions. He threw himself beneath the creature's bulk, and his stone fists drove upward into soft flesh. The creature screamed, a sound that made the earlier roar seem gentle by comparison, and thrashed. One wild claw swing caught Lissa's branch and the crystalline Shalaran fell with a sound like breaking glass. Rhys moved before his Kara could process what was happening. The human dropped from his branch directly onto the creature's back. Plasma cutter blazing in his hand, he drove it into the joint where the creature's head met its body, right at the cluster of neural ganglia that most complex organisms shared. The creature's thrashing intensified, then stopped. It collapsed like a felled tree, nearly crushing Tormund before the Krovanite rolled clear. For a moment everyone simply breathed. How Jakara finally managed? Did you know where to strike? Rhys wiped purple blood from his plasma cutter with a handful of broad leaves. Convergent evolution. Most ambush predators have weak spots in similar places. Joints, neural clusters, soft underbellies. It's just how biology works when you're building something that large and fast. You've encountered creatures like this before? Lissa asked, her crystalline structure showing stress fractures from the fall. Well, no, Rhys admitted. But Earth has had plenty of apex predators. Different shapes, same principles. Everything that lives has to die, which means everything has a weak point. Earth, Corvand rumbled, pressing a coagulant pad against his wound. Your homeworld is also classified as a Deathworld, is it not? Class 3, Rhys confirmed. Or it was, before the terraforming. But yeah, growing up you learn to respect the local wildlife. We didn't have anything quite this size, but we had things that could definitely ruin your day if you weren't careful. Shakara stared at the human with newfound understanding and concern. The Coalition knew humans came from a hostile world, but there was a difference between knowing it academically and watching one casually kill a creature that could have slaughtered their entire group. We need to move, Rhys continued, oblivious to the looks he was receiving. That thing's blood is going to attract more predators, and I really don't want to test whether we can kill a second one. Agreed. Corvadit grunted. We should find high ground, establish a defensive position. The emergency beacon is activated. Rescue will triangulate our positions. We just need to survive long enough for them to arrive. 72 hours, Kix said weakly. 3 days on a planet that's already killed one of us in the first hour. Then we'd better get good at not dying, Rhys said, shouldering his pack. Come on. Daylight's burning, and I'm guessing night here is significantly worse. They moved through the jungle in a tight formation, with Tormund leading and Rhys bringing up the rear. Jakara found herself in the middle, constantly scanning the canopy above and the undergrowth below, her every instinct screaming that they were being watched. Because they were. She could see them now once she knew where to look. Eyes in the shadows, movement that wasn't wind, shapes that defied categorization. The jungle was alive in ways that made her homeworld's most dangerous regions seem tame by comparison. Contact, one of the other cadets, a Phylexian named Shay, whispered urgently. Movement, 11 o'clock, multiple targets. Hold, Tormund commanded, raising a fist. A group of creatures emerged from the undergrowth, and Jakara felt her breath catch. They were almost beautiful. Six-legged, covered in iridescent scales that shifted through every color of the visible spectrum, with crystalline antlers that refracted light into dancing rainbows. They're herbivores, Lissa whispered. Look at the flat teeth, the wide-set eyes, They're prey animals. On a death world, Reese added quietly, prey animals are often more dangerous than predators. They've survived this long by being very good at not being eaten, which means they're very good at killing things that threaten them. As if to prove his point, one of the creatures raised its head, antlers glowing with building energy, and released a blast of concentrated sound that turned a nearby tree into splinters. "Run!" Tormund bellowed. Evasive patterns scatter and regroup. They ran. The jungle blurred around Jakara as her 6 legs carried her through the undergrowth at speeds she didn't know she could achieve. Behind her, the crystalline creatures were giving chase, their sonic attacks turning the forest into a war zone. Trees exploded, vines disintegrated, and the very air seemed to vibrate with destructive force. Jakara leaped over a fallen log, ducked under a hanging vine that tried to snag her antennae, and nearly collided with Reese, who had stopped suddenly at the edge of a ravine. "Down there," he shouted over the chaos. "Into the ravine. The walls will break up the sonic attacks. That's a 40-meter drop." Jakara protested. "Better than being turned into paste." Reese grabbed her by the thorax and jumped. They fell together, tumbling through the air in a tangle of limbs and panic. The ravine walls rushed past, covered in slick moss that offered no purchase. Zomarda closed her eyes, certain this was how she would die, not by monster or toxin but by gravity and stupidity. The impact with water drove the air from her spiracles, cold, dark, moving water that immediately swept them downstream. Jakara fought to keep her head above the surface, her legs pumping frantically. Beside her, Reese was swimming with practiced strokes, his human physiology apparently well suited to aquatic environments. "Swim for the side," he called. "Before the waterfall." "What waterfall?" Jakara managed, then heard it, the roar of falling water growing louder ahead. They swam desperately, fighting the current, but it was too strong. The water had them, and the waterfall approached with terrible inevitability. Jakara caught a glimpse of the drop, easily 100 meters into churning foam below before the world tilted and they were falling again, falling through spray and mist in the absolute certainty of death. Reese grabbed her mid-fall, pulling her into a position that put his body beneath hers. "Hold your breath," he shouted. And then they hit. The impact knocked all thought from Zakar's mind. Water became a solid thing, a crushing force that drove them deep into a pool that tasted of minerals and decay. She felt Reese's grip loosen, saw him sinking deeper, bubbles streaming from his mouth. Some distant part of her mind registered that humans needed continuous air, that they couldn't hold their breath as long as Vrillex, that if she didn't act, he would drown after saving her life. Jakara grabbed him and kicked upward. They broke the surface together, gasping and choking. The current was gentler here, carrying them toward a rocky shore where they dragged themselves onto dry land and simply lay there, too exhausted to care what might find them. "That," Reese finally said, his voice hoarse, "was not my best idea." Jakara laughed. Actually laughed. A chittering sound of pure hysteria. "You saved my life. Twice. Once from the sonic blasts. Once from drowning." "Pretty sure you saved mine from drowning," Reese corrected. "So we're even." They lay there as the light filtering through the canopy shifted from the sickly green of day toward the deep purple of approaching dusk. Somewhere above, their squadmates might be alive or dead. Somewhere out there, hundreds of cadets were fighting for survival against impossible odds. 17%, Jakara said quietly. The computer said 17% survival probability. "Computers don't know everything," Reese replied, sitting up to check their supplies. His pack had survived the fall somehow. They calculate based on averages and statistics. But we're not average. We're coalition cadets. We're trained for this. Trained for survival on hostile worlds, yes. Not for surviving a Class 4 Deathworld with minimal supplies and no extraction for 3 days. Then we'll just have to be better than trained. Reese stood, offering her a hand, an odd human gesture, but one she appreciated. "Come on. We need to find shelter before dark, and I really don't want to meet whatever hunts at night on this rock." They found a cave hollowed into the ravine wall, barely large enough for 2 but deep enough to offer protection from the elements. Reese used the plasma cutter to seal the entrance partially, leaving a gap for air circulation, but small enough that nothing large could enter without making significant noise. As darkness fell over Carnivac 7, they huddled in their shelter and listened to the night come alive. The sounds were beyond description. Roars and screams and clicks and whistles that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Bioluminescent creatures drifted past their cave entrance like ghosts, trailing light in colors Jakara had no names for. Things that might have been birds or bats or something entirely other filled the air, their calls painting the darkness with sound. My homeworld, Jakara said quietly, is peaceful, gentle. We evolved on a world where cooperation was rewarded, where aggression was unnecessary. The most dangerous creature on Vrilix Prime is a small predator that mostly eats insects. Sounds nice, Reese said, checking their water supply. Boring. My cohort mates always said. They wanted adventure, excitement. They wanted to join the Coalition Academy and see the universe. Agara's antennae drooped. Now they're out there dying and I'm hiding in a cave. You're surviving, Reese corrected. There's no shame in that. And tomorrow when it's light, we'll find the others. We'll group up, establish a defensive position, and we'll all survive together. That's the whole point of the coalition, right? Different species working together, using our combined strengths to overcome challenges no one species could face alone. You sound like an instructor, Jakara observed. My mom was one before the accident. Reese's expression flickered with something painful. She used to say that humans survived on Earth because we learned to cooperate, to form tribes and communities, that we weren't the strongest or the fastest or the smartest, but we were the best at working together. And yet you're known among the cadets as a loner. Working together doesn't mean being friends, Reese said quietly. Just means recognizing when you need help and being willing to offer it. Like today, something massive passed by their cave, its footsteps shaking dust from the ceiling. Both cadets froze, barely breathing, as the creature paused. They could hear it sniffing, searching, its breath whistling through what must have been enormous nostrils. Then it moved on, and they breathed again. Reese, Jakara said after a long silence. Why aren't you afraid? Who says I'm not? The human's teeth showed in the dim light of their emergency glow stick. I'm terrified. My heart's been racing since the alarm went off. But fear's just information, right? It tells you something's dangerous. But it doesn't have to control you. You acknowledge it, factor it into your decisions, and then you do what needs to be done anyway. Is that a human thing? It's a survivor thing. Humans just had to get good at it, because everything on Earth was trying to kill us for a couple million years. He settled against the cave wall, his eyes already drooping. Get some sleep. I'll take first watch. Wake me in 4 hours, and we'll switch. You trust me to keep watch? Jakara asked, surprised. You pulled me out of that pool when you could have just saved yourself, Reese pointed out. Yeah, I trust you. Jakara watched the humans breathing slow as sleep claimed him with enviable speed. Outside, Carnivax 7 continued its nightly symphony of death and survival, predator and prey, the eternal dance of evolution pushed to its most extreme conclusions. She thought about her cohort mates, scattered across this nightmare world. Thought about Tormund and Lissa and the others they'd been separated from. Thought about the 199 cadets fighting their own battles against impossible odds. 17% survival probability. But Reese was right, statistics weren't destiny. They were just numbers. And numbers could be changed by determination and cooperation, and the simple refusal to give up. Tomorrow they would find the others. Tomorrow they would increase those odds. Tonight she would keep watch over this strange human who treated a Class 4 Deathworld like an inconvenient camping trip. And she would make sure he survived to see another dawn. After all, the Coalition taught that cooperation was strength, and Jakara was beginning to understand that lesson in ways her instructors had never intended. Dawn on Carnivax 7 arrived, not with the gentle emergence of a sun but with a violent explosion of light that seemed to tear through the canopy like a physical force. Jakara jerked awake from her watch shift. She'd let Reese sleep through his turn. He'd needed it and immediately regretted being conscious. The jungle had transformed overnight. What had been merely hostile in daylight now revealed itself as actively malevolent in the morning light. The plants around their cave had grown visibly, their root systems writhing across ground that had been clear hours before. Flowers the size of Jakara's thorax had bloomed, releasing clouds of pollen that shimmered with an oily iridescence that screamed toxicity. Morning? Reese croaked, emerging from sleep with admirable speed. His human eyes, those strange forward-facing organs, tracked across the transformed landscape with what Chara now recognized as tactical assessment. "You let me sleep the whole night. You needed it more than I did," Jikara said. "Vriliks can go 70 hours without sleep. Humans need 8 hours every cycle." "I can function on 4, Reese countered, checking their supplies. "But thanks." "How was your night?" "Educational. Did you know the trees here move? Not grow, move. I watched one uproot itself and walk approximately 20 meters before replanting. Ambulatory flora," Reese nodded as if this was completely normal. "Makes sense on a planet with this much competition for resources. Probably chasing optimal sunlight or water sources." He unsealed their cave entrance with the plasma cutter. "We should need to find water, food, and other survivors, not necessarily in that order." They emerged into a world that assaulted every sense simultaneously. The humidity had increased overnight, turning the air into something more liquid than gas. Temperature gauges showed 50 degrees Celsius, well into dangerous territory for most coalition species. The filter masks were already working overtime, their readouts showing they'd consumed nearly 10% of their operational lifespan just from one night of breathing. Carnivac 7's toxic atmosphere. "We have 65 hours of filtration left," Yizkara calculated. After that we'll figure something out," Reese interrupted. Not unkindly. "One crisis at a time, listen. You hear that?" Roskara strained her auditory receptors. Beneath the constant drone of insects and the whisper of moving plants, she caught it. Distant voices, barely audible but definitely sentient communication patterns. "Survivors," she breathed. They moved toward the sound with weapons ready, Reese with his plasma cutter, Jaka with a makeshift spear fashioned from a fallen branch that had the reassuring heft of processed metal. The local wood was apparently dense enough to function as armor plating. The voices grew clearer as they approached, and Shika recognized one. Tormund's distinctive bass rumble. Her spirits lifted fractionally. If the massive Krovanite had survived the night, maybe the odds weren't as grim as the statistics suggested. They found them in a clearing that looked natural but which Zakara suspected was actually the result of some past creature's territorial display. Tormund, Lissa, Kix, and 7 other cadets she recognized from the transport. A few more had joined them overnight, bringing the total group to 15. "Zakara!" Lissa's crystalline structure flashed with relief patterns. "Reese, we thought you were dead. The waterfall we saw you go over takes more than that to kill a human," Reese said with that infuriating grin. "Or a Vriliks, apparently. What's the situation?" Torvand's expression was grim. "Bad. We've had contact with 3 other groups via emergency beacon signals. Total survivors we know about, 47 cadets. We lost 12 overnight to various causes: predation, toxic exposure, 1 to falling into a sinkhole filled with digestive enzymes. The planet is literally eating us. 47 survivors out of 200. The mathematics were cruel. 17% survival probability suddenly seemed optimistic. "Have we heard from the rescue team?" Jakara asked, though she already knew the answer from Tormund's expression. "Negative. The atmospheric interference is worse than predicted. They can track our beacons, but communication is impossible. We're on our own until they can safely descend through the ionosphere." Tormund gestured to a crude map scratched into the dirt. "I've been coordinating positions with the other groups. If we can converge on this location," he indicated a point roughly equidistant from the beacon signatures, "we'll have strength in numbers. High ground, defensible position, water source." "How far?" Reese asked, studying the map. 16 kilometers through hostile terrain. "That's a full day's march under ideal conditions," another cadet, a Zephyri named Kolren, said, his feathered crest flat with anxiety. "Through this jungle, with predators and toxic plants and geological instability, it could take 3 days. And we only have 2 days left until rescue. Then we move fast, and we move smart," Reese said, his voice carrying a confidence that seemed borrowed from somewhere beyond his years. "Tormund, what's our defensive capability?" "Limited. We have 2 plasma cutters, 1 projectile weapon with 47 rounds, various improvised melee weapons. Against the megafauna we've encountered, we're severely outmatched." "What about tactics?" Reese pressed. Coalition training covers small unit operations in hostile territory. We use formations, scouts, rotating guards. We don't need to fight everything. We just need to avoid being easy targets. The human's right. A gruff voice came from the edge of the clearing. A Graythian cadet named Vextil emerged from the tri-line, his reptilian scales scored with fresh wounds. I'm from Pod 251. We lost 8 cadets overnight because we stayed put and tried to fortify a position. The jungle adapted to us. The plants literally grew around our defenses. By morning we were trapped in a cage of thorns. The ones who survived did so by moving constantly. Motion over position, Reese mused. The planet's ecology is designed to overwhelm static targets. So we don't give it static targets. We keep moving. We keep adapting faster than the environment can adjust to us. That's exhausting, Kipps protested. Some of us aren't built for constant movement. The Narath physiology requires regular rest periods. Then we help each other, Shakara interjected, surprising herself. That's what the coalition is about, isn't it? Humans can carry the Narath during rest periods. Corvinites can break trail through dense vegetation. Vrlix can scout ahead with our superior sensory organs. We use our combined strengths. This isn't academy training, Lissa said quietly. This is survival, real survival, where if we fail, we die. No reset, no simulation end, no instructors stopping the exercise when it gets too dangerous. Exactly, Reese agreed. Which is why we can't afford to think like cadets anymore. We need to think like survivors, like soldiers, like people who refuse to be part of that 83% casualty rate. A moment of silence fell over the group as the weight of their situation settled in. Around them, Carnivac 7 continued its endless cycle of growth and death, the jungle indifferent to their deliberations. All right, Torvin finally said. We move as a group. Scouts ahead and behind, main body in the middle protecting the wounded and exhausted. We travel fast, we travel light, and we don't stop except for essential rest. Agree? A chorus of assent, some more enthusiastic than others. They set out within the hour, and Shira quickly learned that marching through a Class 4 Deathworld bore no resemblance to the survival exercises she'd excelled at in academy training. Every step required constant vigilance. The ground was often neither ground nor solid, but rather a mat of fungal nuntworks that could give way without warning. The trees weren't really trees but massive colonial organisms that could reshape their structure to trap prey. The air carried spores that could colonize unprotected lungs in minutes. Reese had volunteered for forward scout duty, working with Vexitil to probe the terrain ahead. Jakara found herself in the main group, helping Kix maintain the pace. The Naratha was struggling in the heat, his cold-blooded physiology poorly suited to the extreme temperatures. I don't understand how you're doing this, Kix gasped during a brief rest stop. Your homeworld, Vrlix Prime, it's classified as a paradise world. How are you functioning in this nightmare? Fear is an excellent motivator, Zakara said, offering him water. And I'm not functioning well, I'm just refusing to give up. The human makes it look easy. Zakara followed his gaze to where Reese was conferring with Tormund, the two of them studying something on the ground. I don't think it's easy for him. I think he's just very good at hiding how difficult it is. A piercing whistle from Vextil brought them to immediate alert. The Graythian was pointing upward, his movements urgent. Canopy predators. Multiple targets, approaching fast. Jir Skara looked up and felt her spiracles clench. Descending from the upper canopy were creatures that defied easy categorization. Part avian, part reptilian, with wingspans exceeding 10 meters and talons that glinted like surgical instruments. Their eyes, too many eyes, tracked the cadet group with disturbing intelligence. Tight formation, Tormund bellowed. Protect